Fauci? And are you proud that we are the free state of Florida? It's so great to be back. This is such a wonderful convention. I agree. I don't think anybody does it better anywhere in the country. And part of it is because the state of Florida has really embraced the importance of education and the fundamental role that parents play in the education of their own children. And we can sit here and we'll talk about a lot of those issues that go into that. But what we have done in Florida is produce irrefutable results that our approach works. Florida was just ranked #1 in education by U.S. News and World Report when the nation's report card reported the first post-COVID test scores, the only thing all 50 states do. Florida came in 3rd and 4th, respectively, in 4th grade reading and 4th grade math. We ranked #1 in education freedom. We ranked #1 in parental involvement in education. And we ranked #1 in higher education affordability. No tuition increases at our state universities in a decade, and we're going to keep it that way. And part of the reason we were able to do that is because while we embrace homeschool parents and provide more support than any state, we also understand that's not something every parent can do. And when it came time to make decisions during COVID, we had to make decisions about, do you follow the crowd? Do you abdicate your office to somebody like Dr. Fauci? Or do you stand up to do what's right and make sure kids could be in school? And we made sure, using our authority, that every school district, starting in the summer of 2020, every school had to be open for in-person instruction. And so parents in this state had the ability to send their kid to school in person. We knew it was the right thing to do. Yeah, the media was lying about it. The left was lying about it. Even some Republicans were very weak on it, but we did the right thing. And now nobody wants to admit that they wanted to lock kids out of school for a year and a half, because you've seen the results. From 2020 to 2022, people have just totally vanished from some of these urban school districts across the country. Chicago, 25,000 fewer students than in 2020. Los Angeles, 43,000 fewer students than in 2020. New York, 50,000 fewer students than in 2020. In Florida, our school enrollment is up and our homeschool numbers are up. But you think of a place like Chicago, these kids, you're more likely to get shot than you are to get a world-class education in some of these places. What they are doing has been totally destructive. And I think back to COVID, when a lot of these school unions were doing everything they could to keep the kids locked out of school. They were trying to say it was too dangerous. And yet, in May, this is 3 years ago, late May of 2020, they started to do George Floyd protest. BLM riots came out of that. And people were saying, well, wait a minute, if you can't do school because of COVID, if you're saying people got to stay in their homes because of COVID, how is it okay to have thousands of people crowded together to do these protests? And many of them became riots. And you had health bureaucrats said, well, you shouldn't have kids in school, you shouldn't have economy open, but you absolutely should be out protesting regardless of COVID. And that's when you knew this was all a total fraud. They were using political ideology, and they were trying to control your behavior. They wanted to lock the kids out of school, not because it was too dangerous to have the kids in school, because they didn't want to have kids in school. And so we showed, and we really blew up that entire narrative in the state of Florida by standing against it. Obviously, when you saw the rioting going on in Minneapolis, I didn't just sit there and do nothing. I called out our National Guard. We were not going to let Florida cities burn down, and that did not happen here, and it will never happen here. And so we have to be honest about the destruction that we have seen throughout our country over the last 3 years, particularly in these urban areas that turn their back on our school children and put the interests of school unions ahead of the interest of parents and students. And education's an important issue. As a governor, I know how important it is for the state, but I also look at it through the lens of being a father of a 6, a 5, and a 3-year-old. And my wife and I, we really believe in our bones in the rights of parents to direct the education and upbringing of their kids. We were one of the first states in the country to sign into law a Parental Bill of Rights. And part of parents' rights means you have a right as a parent to curriculum transparency. You have a right to know what is being taught in your kid's school, and if there are materials that are inappropriate because of age or they violate Florida standards, you have the right to blow the whistle on that. Now, we've had empowered parents to do that. Parents have been doing that, and most school districts have been fine, but there have been some that have done some really questionable things. So the parents will blow the whistle if they see something like pornographic books in a middle school library. Of course that is not appropriate, and so they will do that, and that book should not be there. The media, they try to say that this is, quote, banning books. But what you have in a school, you have to make judgments about what's appropriate or not. Doesn't mean you as adults can't buy these books. Some of them I don't know why you'd buy, but they're available in Florida. You go ahead and knock yourself out if you want to do that. But that's much different than what should be in front of a 10-year-old school child. And so the media, when they talk about book ban, understand that is a hoax. They are creating a false narrative. We actually did a press conference that we titled Exposing the Book Ban Hoax. And before I had any of the parents talk, before I even talked, we played a short video that just showed what it was the parents were objecting to. Had some graphic images, had some very graphic language, and the news stations who were covering that press conference had to cut their feed because they said it was too graphic. Well, if it's too graphic for the 6 o'clock news, how is it okay for a 10-year-old school child? And the latest thing they're trying to do is down in Miami-Dade, you have legacy media outlets creating this poem hoax. And so what this is some book of poems. I never heard of it. I had nothing to do with any of this, but it was a book of poems that was in an elementary school library, and the school or the school district determined that was more appropriate to be in the middle school library. So they moved it from the elementary school library to the middle school library. Legacy media outlets are saying that Miami-Dade is banning books. Literally just moving it from one part of the school to the next is now considered a book ban. So you know when they're doing that, and even the school district had to come out and say that's ridiculous. You know, we made the decision. We think it's better to be in middle school. But when they're doing that, you know these legacy media outlets are lying to you. They are trying to create a political narrative that is totally divorced from the facts. And if they're going to do something like this ridiculous poem hoax and actually put that out there and think that you're going to believe it, honestly, that just shows you they're insulting your intelligence. In our country, a republic requires citizens to be engaged, and if you are a citizen who's accepting legacy media outlets uncritically, their narratives uncritically, without using your own independent judgment, you are failing at your duty of being a conscientious citizen. Do not buy what they're trying to feed you. But I think to myself, why would it even be an issue that we would even be talking about having something in front of an 11-year-old where you have very explicit pornographic images in school? That would have never happened when I was growing up or any of you were growing up. And so you have it, and then we want parents to be armed with the ability to make sure their kids in a safe environment, and yet you have narrative and you have the left trying to jam this in. Make no mistake, they don't want the parents involved in education. They don't want the parents involved in education because they view you as an impediment to their ideological agenda. They view you as an impediment to their ability to indoctrinate kids with their beliefs and their agendas. I'm sorry, I choose our beliefs as parents over the beliefs of the ideological left. So it's important that we're standing up for the rights of parents to be involved. We got involved in this most recent election. You know, I was running, obviously, for re-election, but it's not just about me. This is a team effort. You can't do it alone. So we got involved in a lot of school board races across the state. We had 29 conservative school board candidates out of 34 races win election to school board throughout the state, and they're making a big difference. We also understand that our school system should be about educating kids, not indoctrinating kids. And that means we've gone on the offense against toxic ideologies like critical race theory. We have eliminated that in our K through 12 schools. We're not teaching kids to hate our country or to hate each other with your tax dollars. And it's important we're very clear about that, but it's also important to say, okay, that's not what you want out of education, but what are you for? What do you want to see in education? And one of the things we've put an emphasis on is getting the Constitution and American civics back in our classroom as a focal point of education. We now actually offer a great course. It's a 50-hour course for teachers where they can take, and if they take it, they get a $3,000 bonus. And it's a course where we have people from places like Hillsdale College, all these experts talking about the foundations of our republic, talking about things like the history of the English Constitution, talking about the religious influences, talking about Enlightenment, all these important things that have become a lost art in modern American society. We need to teach these kids what it means to be an American. We need to teach them about our Constitution and our Bill of Rights. We need to teach them why people have been willing to fight and die to preserve our way of life. And so we are doing that in Florida. Part of the way we show the importance of being an American is contrasting that with other systems. And so we're the only state in this country that sets aside one day every year to teach our students about the evils of communist regimes throughout history. We're teaching the truth about Marxism and Leninism. As a parent, one of the things that I think is challenging, and I'm not saying it's ever been easy to be a parent, it's the most important job you can do, but I look back when I was growing up, and I didn't see as many negative influences or distractions as we have now with our kids. And so my wife and I really believe that parents in Florida and throughout the country should be able to send their kid to school, allow them to watch cartoons, just be kids, without having somebody shove an agenda down their throats. It is wrong for a teacher to tell a second grader that they may have been born in the wrong body or that their gender is a choice. Gender ideology has no place in our education system, and we've made sure that it doesn't have a place in Florida. And we have put the kibosh on the use of pronouns. You cannot force a kid to choose pronouns in the state of Florida. And we stand for that, and we stand for parents' rights in education, elimination of gender ideology, because it's the right thing to do. And if that means we have to stand up to a major company like Disney, well, here I stand. I'm not backing down. We run the state of Florida. They do not run the state of Florida. It is wrong to sexualize children. It's wrong to put it in your programming. And it's wrong to try to force that in our schools. And that we will never back down. We also embrace opportunities for our girls and women athletes to compete in athletics with fairness and with integrity. It is wrong to have somebody swim on the men's team for 3 years, then switch to the women's team, and they say you win the national women's championship. That is wrong. That's not only taking away opportunities from other women athletes, it's also asking us to be complicit in a fraud, because that is not true that you are the women's champion after swimming 3 years on the men's team. So we've got to be grounded in truth. And it's sad that we even have to be discussing some of these things, but we have a responsibility to protect our youth from ideology run amok, including ideology in the medical profession. And so to that end, in the state of Florida, we have banned gender surgeries for minors in the state of Florida. That is mutilation, and it is wrong. And if you do it, you're losing your medical license and you're going to jail. Nobody has done more to embrace parental choice in education more than the state of Florida. And under my administration, we have more school choice than any place in human history, probably, certainly any place in the United States of America, because we understand how important it is that parents are directing the education of their kids. So we just signed universal education savings accounts for every parent in the state of Florida. The money will follow the student. Obviously, we have programs where we want homeschool parents participating, and we're expanding those efforts as well. At the end of the day, not every school is going to be right for every kid, and parents, understandably, are looking at the education that their kids are getting, and a lot of it is good academics, but a lot of it is good values. A lot of it is making sure their education is grounded in their faith, and they have every right to do that. And in Florida, we've empowered parents to do that regardless of their income levels. And so we're proud of what we've done to be #1 in education freedom. But with this new bill I've signed, you ain't seen nothing yet. Now, we're also leaning in on having solid, dependable higher education. Because I think if you look around the country, a lot of parents look to see some of these universities and they wonder, if I send my kid to school after 18 years of raising them and putting in our values, is it just going to be undone in some indoctrination center in some very left-wing university? And unfortunately, too many universities in this country, the norm has been not to be pursuing truth or not to be giving students a foundation so they can think for themselves, but instead in trying to impose ideology, try to promote conformity of thinking, and even try to foment political activism. This higher education system in Florida is paid for by your tax dollars. They don't have a right to just do whatever they want. They need to be focused on the mission that the people of Florida want for our higher education system. And so we've made very clear that's exactly what we're going to do here in Florida. Now, I also point out, as proud as I am of having affordable colleges and universities, a 4-year brick and ivy education is not the only way you can be successful in this world, and indeed, it's not the best way for many people. We have promoted technical education, vocational education, apprenticeships more than any state in the country. You can get training in some of these really important fields that are in high demand, and you could be making very good money at a very young age. You do that 4 or 5 years, kids get training in electrical, they're working 4 or 5 years, they start their own company and become entrepreneurs. There's a lot of great things you can do. And a 4-year degree is not some magic ticket to success. In fact, the students that get really good vocational training in things like welding and electrical, truck driving, all these things, a lot of times they do much better financially than a student that gets a degree in like zombie studies and goes $100,000 in debt with 6 years, under their belt. So we're very mindful of that, and we have a very clear message that doing a vocational track, you're not any less than somebody that goes to a college. It's all honorable stuff. In some respects, they're better pathways, and so that's our view on that, and we're going to continue to do it. At the same time, we have universities, and we want them to focus on the core mission that universities are supposed to fulfill. And we've taken steps to ensure that. In Florida now, because of our efforts, all tenured professors must undergo review every 5 years and can be let go for poor performance. We've also used our appointment ability to ensure that the institutions in Florida are going in a direction that reflects the values of this state. We have a small liberal arts college in Sarasota called New College. And I didn't know much about it. Not a lot of people in Florida knew much about it, but it was almost like a commune. It was left of the left, all about ideology, critical race theory, gender theory, all this other stuff. It was supposed to be, under Florida statutes, the top honors college in Florida, but it wasn't fulfilling that function. The enrollment was low, test scores had declined, and so we made the decision to say, okay, if this is, and it's in beautiful part of Sarasota, right on the water. I mean, it's a great place, location-wise. So we made the decision, okay, I'm going to put people on the board there that are going to right the ship. So I appointed 7 conservative members to the Board of Trustees. They came in, they relieved the president of her duties, they put in a conservative president, they eliminated DEI and CRT at the university, and they reformulated the mission statement to say that New College would be the top publicly funded classical liberal arts college in America, similar to like Hillsdale College and some of these other places. So we're putting money into it, we're all in on this mission, but what you're finding is you've got professors around the country who want to come down and work at New College because they understand how oppressive intellectually the environment is in many of these universities. If you go any way outside of the political correctness or whatever the agenda is, it's like walking on eggshells. You can lose your job by just saying the wrong thing. So people are excited. You're going to see a lot of good news out of that. But at the end of the day, these are our institutions as Floridians, and we have every right to ensure that they're fulfilling missions that we think are in the best interests of the state. And that's why I just signed legislation recently eliminating DEI from all of our public universities. They say it's diversity, equity, and inclusion, but in reality, it's used as a veneer to impose ideological conformity on the university. We think DEI better stands for, the way it's practiced, discrimination, exclusion, and indoctrination, and that has no part in our public university system. And we're the first state to put the nix on it, and I guarantee you other states are going to follow suit. So what we're doing, I think, is taking education into our own hands as Floridians. And you're doing it as parents in the homeschool movement. We're doing it in Tallahassee as governor and our legislature to say education is just something we've got to get right. You cannot have a society in which the education just totally collapses into a lot of these side issues. And I'll tell you, just growing up in Florida, I always took for granted that we lived in a free country. I never thought that there would honestly be a threat to freedom here. But the last 4 or 5 years, if you've lived through that, what people were doing during COVID, what people have been doing with the bureaucracy and the weaponization of agencies like the FBI, who would have thought the FBI would ever go after parents going to school board meetings? And yet that is happening and has happened. And so it's really impressed upon me just how fragile freedom really is. Our founding fathers understood this. When they met in Philadelphia to frame the Constitution in 1787, they brought with them an intense study of the history of every republic that had ever been tried in the history of mankind, because they wanted to try to derive lessons from history and apply those lessons to the experiment that they were launching here in America. And their study showed them that there was really only one thing that all of these experiments, Republican forms of government, had in common throughout history, and it was this: every single one of them had failed. And so they believed, and they were right, that it really falls to the United States of America to determine, could people really govern themselves? Could we have a society based on the idea that our rights come from God, not from the government? Could we have a society based on the idea of the rule of law, not the rule of individual men? Or was mankind forever destined to live under various forms of despotism? And they believed this society would answer that question for all of human history. When Dr. Benjamin Franklin was walking out of the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, he was approached on the street and asked, "Dr. Franklin, what have you given us, a republic or a monarchy?" His response was, "A republic if you can keep it." Franklin and the founders understood you could have the best Constitution in the world, you could have the best Declaration of Independence in the world. These things do not run on autopilot. They require citizens to be dedicated to constitutional principles and be dedicated to the cause of freedom. And that may mean you put on the uniform of your country like I have and go and serve overseas. And many people have given the last full measure of devotion in service to our country. It may just mean that you're engaged in your community as a parent, taking an interest in your kids' education, taking an interest in school board. There's a whole host of ways that you can uphold these core principles. I believe the survival of the American experiment requires a revival of true American principles. You are part of that revival. You give us hope that our next generation will carry the torch of freedom. You cannot, if you look at the decline in the corruption of education throughout our country, you cannot look at that as any other thing other than posing a mortal threat to the viability of a free society. What you're doing is fighting back against that. What we're doing in Tallahassee, by empowering parents, by providing curriculum transparency, by fighting gender ideology and CRT and elevating civics, we are doing our part to ensure that freedom survives into the future. Florida is doing it right. Florida is taking on the key issues head on. So much easier to just sit there like a potted plant and not want to get involved in these issues because people fire at you when you take a stand. Heck, a lot of these Republicans are out there saying that we should cave to Disney and give them corporate welfare. Not on my watch, that's not happening. So we're doing it right, and I think you're doing your part as parents and as educators to preserve what the founding father of our country, George Washington, called the sacred fire of liberty. This is a fire that burned in Independence Hall in 1776 when 56 men pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor so that they could establish a new nation conceived in liberty. It's the fire that burned at a cemetery in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, when the nation's first Republican president pledged this nation to a new birth of freedom. It's a fire that burned in the bosoms of merry band of brothers who stormed the beaches of France, defeated Nazi Germany, and saved freedom throughout the world. It's a fire that burned at the foot of the Berlin Wall in the late 1980s when a very resolute president stood in front of that wall and said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall," and brought communism to an end. This is a responsibility we have to carry that torch. It's not a responsibility we should shirk. It's a responsibility that we should welcome, because if not us, who? And if not now, when? So I'm proud of what you're doing. to carry on this sacred fire of liberty. You can always count on the support of the state of Florida to support the rights of parents to choose the proper education for their children. And I don't think you can find a state that's done more in this country in our lifetimes to support education and the greater cause of liberty than we right here in the state of Florida. But I can tell you this, I have only begun to fight. Thank you all. God bless you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll come.
From California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream water, this land